think Game of Thrones is the most popular show ever. Maybe not from a purely hours watched perspective, because shows like Star Trek and The Simpsons have been around longer than many of you have been alive. But at its peak, there's never been a show that was as popular or obsessed over more than Game of Thrones. For the past 15 years or so, we all had a really great time theorizing about every mystery, examining every character, and arguing over every little detail of this story. But if you notice, Season 8 was so universally hated that no one even tried to make a theory that could make sense of the ending. As soon as the last episode was over, we all just collectively suppressed the thought of it like a bad memory from our childhood, and it felt like everyone from the die-hard book readers to the casual show watchers all just accepted that there was no possible way this ending could ever be explained. Even I had to ask myself, is this really so bad that I can't make a theory about it? Is this really beyond the limits of my imagination?
What? Man, hell no!
So I decided to watch Season 8 again, except this time I watched it like it was something I had never seen before, and the only thing I knew about it was that everyone loved it and it was universally considered the perfect ending. I had to completely change my perspective and watch it with a more objective frame of mind, and I had to consider the possibility that maybe my expectations were the only thing stopping me from recognizing how genius it really was. I think one of the reasons we all hated the ending so much is because we forgot why we fell in love with this show in the first place. This show ruined your perception on how a story is told, and it was forced to give answers and resolutions to things that were never meant to have explanations in the first place. The Game of Thrones story was never meant to end like other stories, and it was never meant to have a resolution for every character and every plotline. And because many of the details and subplots were created primarily for world building, sometimes plots get forgotten and characters go missing or die, and it doesn't mean anything to the overall story. From the very beginning, this show told you it was going to break your heart. It promised your feelings would be hurt and your expectations subverted, but week after week and season after season, you all kept coming back.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
No one wanted Ned to die. No one imagined Robb would be betrayed. No one thought Oberyn would lose. But they all did. And if the seeds of disappointment hadn't been planted early on, we would have never allowed ourselves to fall so deeply in love with this story in the first place. Even after 7 seasons of seeing so many characters get killed without any closure to their story, everyone still expected the series to end with a clean resolution where everything was tied up neatly like a happily ever after fairy tale. We fell in love with this show because no one ever gets a happy ending, and even characters that seem intelligent and in control ended up dying because they made easily avoidable stupid mistakes. Ned should have never told Cersei he knew Jaime was the father of her kids. Oberyn should have killed the Mountain when he had the chance. Robb was stupid for marrying Talisa and not expecting Walder Frey to be mad about it. And Littlefinger killed Lysa Arryn in front of Sansa without having a backup plan, because if she didn't decide to help him at the last minute, he would have been dead. None of these decisions were made in Season 8, and they're all things that happen in the books too. But because our emotions started to influence our expectations, we treated the decisions everyone made in Season 8 like they were unforgivable.
Is that unforgivable?
Now, I'm fully aware of why everyone hated this season, because when I first watched it, I hated it too. But I need you to take a step back and recognize that D&D are actually good writers.
I will not hear it!
Everyone thinks the earlier seasons were good because they just copied everything from the books, but almost all of the most memorable scenes from the show were 100% made up by them. Robert and Cersei talking about their marriage, not in the books. Littlefinger's chaos as a ladder speech, not in the books. Brienne of Tarth and the Hound's fight, not in the books either. Catelyn Stark's motherless child confession about her true feelings for Jon, not in the books. Davos and Shireen's relationship, Grey Worm and Missandei's relationship, and Tyrion and Podrick's relationship, they're all not in the books. Even the introduction of Tywin in the tent with Jaime, his scenes with Arya at Harrenhal, and honestly almost every Tywin scene is not in the books. Now I can go on and on all day with really great scenes, moments, and quotes that aren't in the books. But the point I'm trying to make is that D&D are actually good writers, but they had the impossible task of trying to finish a story that George himself can't seem to finish, because it's nearly impossible to give a story like this a traditional conclusion. I think the only way to end a story like this is by leaving it with a cliffhanger or a surprise revelation that gives everyone something to discuss and theorize about after it's over. Ending this story with a twist would have changed the way a lot of you felt about it, and not only would it have given us something to talk about, it would have removed the need to give it a clean resolution. Now, the biggest challenge with this theory is asking you to remove your feelings from the idea and just focus on the narrative details of the story. Because unfortunately, no matter what I say, I can't fix how the ending emotionally damaged everyone. So if you're willing to put your emotions aside, I think this idea could not only change the way you see the ending, but maybe, just maybe, it could expose that the details of the final season that everyone hated might have been so genius that we all just misunderstood them. Now, if we're being honest, the first 2 episodes of season 8 were just as good as any other episodes from any other season. And it wasn't until episode 3, specifically when the Night King died, that everyone started to complain about how bad it was. For 7 straight seasons, the Night King was built up as this unstoppable force that was impossible to beat, only for him to die like a normal human from a normal injury that was pretty anticlimactic. But that really wasn't the worst part about it. We really didn't care that he died so easily. We were disappointed that we never got a chance to learn what he was specifically trying to accomplish. The only person that tries to explain what he wants is Bran, but I'm 100% certain this isn't what he's trying to do.
What does he want? An endless night. He wants to erase this world, and I am its memory.
Now, the reason I say I'm so certain this isn't what he's trying to do is because the three-eyed raven was living in a giant weirwood tree north of the wall for like 100 years. So if killing him was the goal, he could have easily figured out a way to do that without having to go through all of this trouble. And if killing Bran was his new goal, I think he would have put more effort into the chase after he attacked the weirwood cave. He would have used all of his powers and sent his entire army after him, and he would have never let him get south of the wall. I think somewhere along the way we all got lost in the fantasy side of the story, and we forgot that Game of Thrones was always a political drama that focused on the pursuit of power, and not dragons, magical prophecies, and shadow assassins. Giants, fire witches, and supernatural trees were always secondary to the political maneuvering, and because we all forgot this fact, by the time season 8 started, we all assumed that the Night King was just an evil ice demon that couldn't possibly have political ambitions of his own. What if everything that happened in season 8 was all part of the Night King's plan? And not only was he working with the Children of the Forest the entire time, but he was also controlling Uncle Benjen, Jon Snow, and Bran Stark too.
How? Hold on, bro. How? I'm saying, how? Like this.
What if he never actually wanted to kill Bran? And the reason he came to Winterfell is because he wanted to get killed as part of a much bigger plan that no one would ever suspect.
You have a very suspicious mind.
Everything we know about the Night King comes from the Children of the Forest, but we never consider that a group of magical elves that we don't know anything about could be secretly using the Night King to kill everyone like they originally planned on doing when they first created him. They tell Bran that they created him as a weapon to fight against the First Men, but they never explain why they didn't have a way to stop him, why he decided to attack Westeros now, or why he wants to kill the Children of the Forest. They openly admit that they created a telepathic ice demon to kill everyone in Westeros, but for some reason, we're supposed to believe that they really want to save everybody from him. I don't think they ever wanted to stop the Night King, and they never wanted to save Westeros either. Just think about this. If the children were really afraid of the Night King, and they really wanted him dead, why didn't they tell Bran that Dragonglass and Valyrian Steel could kill him? And why didn't they tell him what they were specifically training him to do? They told Bran that he was going to be the new three-eyed raven, but if the old one couldn't stop the Night King, why would he be able to do it? They wanted Bran to believe that he was being trained to become the new three-eyed raven, but what they didn't tell him was that he was actually being trained to become the new Night King.
Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out of here. Let's go.
The children needed someone who can handle the Night King's power because they planned on using Bran as a new body for him to transfer his consciousness into. So even though it might have seemed like Bloodraven was showing Bran a bunch of irrelevant events from the past, he was really just testing them to see if he was strong enough to handle the transformation process. Mira was right when she said,
"You died in that cave."
Because the person we see escaping the cave was no longer Bran Stark. It was his body being controlled by the Night King. If the Night King touching Bran was the only way to get past their security system, why didn't Bloodraven tell him to be careful when he was inside the weirwoods? And why didn't he tell him to never let the Night King touch him no matter what? There was no reason why Bran should have even been alone in this scenario anyway, especially because Bloodraven was plugged into the trees and watching everything he was doing.
He touched you.
So he knew Bran was alone in the weirwoods and saw him approaching the Night King, but he didn't try and stop it from happening.
Why?
The touch wasn't the reason he was able to go inside the cave. The touch is what allowed him to go inside of Bran's mind. There was really no reason for the Night King to come inside of the cave anyway, because he already had access to Bran and the children anytime they plugged into the trees. You have to remember that the children are semi-hive-minded and share a collective consciousness that exists inside of the trees. So because their consciousness goes inside of the weirwood world after they die, a physical death isn't the end of their existence like everyone thinks it is. So when we see the children sacrificing themselves so Bran can escape, what we're really seeing is a carefully planned deception meant to make Mira believe that the children are the good guys and they're fighting to save Bran from the Night King.
Theatricality and deception. Powerful agents to the uninitiated.
Pay attention to how Leaf only throws her grenades at the disposable zombies and not the White Walkers. This is all a show that's supposed to look like they're trying to kill them, but in reality,
it's all part of the plan.
But it doesn't stop there. There's no way Bran would have escaped this situation if the Night King really wanted to catch him. And that's why, even though he had thousands of zombies at his disposal, he only sent about a dozen of them to chase Bran after he left the cave. And just when they finally caught up to him, Uncle Benjen shows up out of nowhere and claims that he's been working with the Children of the Forest since he went missing in season 1. Doesn't this entire situation seem a little too convenient? Doesn't it seem like it was set up perfectly so they can escape? Now I know you probably think this is just lazy writing or 3-inch thick Valyrian steel plot armor, but what I see is one step in a master plan that was so complicated that no one would ever consider it was possible. We haven't seen Uncle Benjen since season 1. So it's a really big coincidence that he would have been just sitting around in the snow waiting for a moment like this. He says the White Walkers stabbed him and left him to die, and the children saved him by sticking dragonglass in his heart, just like they did with the Night King. But there's a few things about this story that don't make any sense. First of all, why would the White Walkers leave him to die instead of just killing him and turning him into a zombie? Secondly, why were the children close enough to rescue him, and why would they care? And finally, why would they risk using the same Night King creation method on a random guy? Now, it's possible he was able to get away after being stabbed, and it's possible that the children saved him because he's a Stark and that's important for some reason, but there's a small detail in his story that proves he's lying about everything.
The children found me, stopped the walkers' magic from taking hold.
How?
The same way they made the walkers in the first place. You saw it yourself. You saw it yourself. You saw it yourself.
How does he know Bran saw the Night King being created?
You know you done fucked up, right?
There's really no reason why the children would tell him about everything Bran saw during his training, and if Benjen was plugged into the werewoods, why wouldn't he have tried to communicate with Bran and tell him that he wasn't dead? At this point, Bran is already being controlled by the Night King, so the only reason he would say this is because he wants Mira to know about it. Mira is important because she can validate everything Bran says about the children, the Night King, and the Weirwood Cave, and because she doesn't have anything to gain by lying, it guarantees that no one at Winterfell will be suspicious about what Bran is really there to do. There were a lot of confusing things that happened in season 8, but by far, the most puzzling thing was Bran during the battle at Winterfell. Now we all know he couldn't physically fight in a battle, and he couldn't compete with the Night King's power, but there was absolutely no reason for him to sit outside in the open like this doing nothing. But what if we're looking at this entire scene the wrong way? What if Bran was sitting there because this is where the Night King wants him, and this specific weirwood tree is special because it's necessary for the transfer process to work? If a warg dies near another living thing, it can permanently transfer his consciousness into that thing and take control of their mind. Now most wargs are only strong enough to take over an animal, like the eagle after Jon kills Orell, but if they're powerful enough, they can take over a human. We don't see this character in the show, but in the prologue of A Dance with Dragons, a wildling named Varamir Sixskins, who got that name because he can warg into 6 different animals at once, is almost able to take over a girl's mind after he dies. We've never seen another warg as powerful as the Night King, but we know that he can effortlessly control thousands of different things at once. And because he's hundreds of times more powerful than anyone else we've seen, it's safe to assume that if he died near another person, he would easily be able to force himself inside of their mind. The Night King had already taken control of Bran the same way Bran controls Hodor, but dying in front of the weirwood tree, similar to the way he was created, was the only way he would be able to fully transfer his consciousness into Bran and still keep all of his powers. He came to Winterfell because he planned on getting killed so he can escape his body, but he had to set up a scenario where everyone believed that he actually died. The only person that would have known this was possible was Bran, but because he was already in control of him, no one will be able to tell anyone that this is what he was really trying to accomplish.
Always keep your foes confused. If they don't know who you are or what you want, they can't know what you plan to do next.
This is why Bran gave Arya the dagger, and why the Night King unnecessarily put himself in harm's way when he could have easily just let his army kill everyone at Winterfell while he was chilling at the Dreadfort miles away from any danger. The Night King was in control of this battle the entire time, and he knew that Arya was the only one that could get close enough to him to complete this step in his plan without anyone being suspicious. This is why the Whites are creeping around the library like old school Romero zombies and not really trying to catch her. He never wanted to kill Arya. He was just using the zombies to keep her busy until he got into the right position in front of Bran and in front of the weirwood tree. When you really stop and think about what the Night King can do and how powerful he is, it makes so many of the strange things that happened this season make so much more sense. The Night King had to put on a big show at Winterfell so everyone believed that he actually died, but he also needed soldiers so he can take over King's Landing, and this is why so many Dothraki and Unsullied are still alive after it's over. We all know that he can control thousands of dead bodies at once, and because we never actually see what happens to the Dothraki in the dark, I think he carefully killed them so they didn't have any obvious wounds, and then resurrected them like nothing ever happened. There was so much chaos during that battle that no one was keeping a head count on how many people died. So when the battle was over, and most of them were still alive, no one thought it was possible for the Night King to be controlling them because everyone thought he was dead. Everything in Winterfell went according to plan. He was able to war against many of the Unsullied in Dothraki, he was able to complete the permanent takeover of Bran's body, and he was able to use Jon to fully gain Dany's trust so she would help him take over King's Landing. From the very beginning, Jon was set up as the obvious savior of Westeros, and his entire story was the classic hero's journey where everything was laid out perfectly for him to kill the Night King, save the world, and take his rightful place on the Iron Throne. But because none of those things happened, the question has to be asked, what was the point of him coming back to life? The show wanted him to come back because he was one of the most popular characters, but from a story perspective, who resurrected him and why did they do it? The only reason the Lord of Light would have brought him back is so he could kill the Night King. But because Jon wasn't the one that killed him, and he really didn't do anything important in that battle, I think the Night King is actually the one who brought him back. Just think about this. Every power that Thoros and Melisandre have are also powers that the Night King has too. So it's possible everything they think the Lord of Light is doing is really just him. He can resurrect the dead, he can manipulate the elements, he can communicate through visions and dreams, and because he's a green seer, he can see into the future as well. The only reason the Whites can move is because the Night King is telepathically controlling them. So the fact that one of them is able to stay animated in King's Landing, so far away from him, proves that he's powerful enough to resurrect Beric thousands of miles away. So because we know he can use his powers that far away, he could have easily sent Melisandre visions in the fire, the same way that children were able to send Bran visions in his dreams. The Night King was controlling Jon's body the entire time, and he only needed it to look like he was fighting against him, but in reality, he wasn't needed for this part of the plan, so he just kept him on the sidelines. This is why Jon spent most of the battle running around doing nothing. This is why the Ice Dragon didn't seem like it was really trying to kill him. This is why the Night King didn't kill him when he had the chance, and this is why Jon is constantly telling everyone he doesn't want to be king.
I don't want it.
I told you I don't want it.
I never wanted a crown.
Even though he was already Lord Commander, King of the North, and the de facto King of the Wildlings. Now I know you're probably asking, if Jon was already accepted by everyone as the obvious choice for king, why didn't the Night King just transfer himself into Jon's body instead of an unknown kid in a wheelchair? Even though Jon would have been the perfect person to switch bodies with, he needed someone with Bran's abilities so he can still keep all of his powers. Plus he needed someone that was alive because he can't transfer himself into a dead body. He also needed Jon to overthrow King's Landing and kill Daenerys, and he knew that he could potentially die in the process if he transferred himself into him at Winterfell. Jon could have been killed in the King's Landing battle, executed by the Unsullied, or burned to death by Drogon. So even if he did have all of Bran's abilities, he would have still been at a much bigger risk of dying than Bran ever was. The only person that wants to sit on the Iron Throne is Dany, and the only other person that has a legitimate claim is Jon. So he resurrected Jon to kill Dany, and then made him go live beyond the wall with the Wildlings so he could use his telepathic powers of manipulation to sit on the Iron Throne. Littlefinger was right when he said,
Chaos is a ladder.
So while everyone was distracted by the chaos of dragons, Dothraki, and ice zombies, the Night King was secretly executing a plan to take over Westeros. And not only would everyone not be mad about it, they'd be happy.